Hello, welcome back to AP Computer Science. This is Lab 3, more object-oriented programming. Part 2, we're going to talk about return methods. These are methods that return information to you. The methods we've had before can change internally an object, change the instance variables, print it out perhaps, but they don't actually return any information back to the void main, back to the program that called them. Here we're going to see some methods that give you information so you can store it and use it again later. Now we've actually already seen a couple of these. When we create a scanner, call it keyboard, we've used the method nextInt. What that does is return to the program this integer, which we can then store and use again later. So we're running this method, which scans the keyboard. It takes in an integer. It returns it to the void main. We save it as an int and give it the name num. We can use it again later on in the program. So rather than changing some object that's external to our program, we're putting information into the program that we can use later. So if you were to create a scanner, for example, type in the number 1, it would be saved with the name num, the value 1. So when you print it out, you get the value 1 as an output. Okay. This would return the integer that you then save. How you can tell if it's a return method is what's called the return type. All the methods we've had so far have said public void something. If you have a method that returns an integer, it'll say int here. If it returns a double, it'll say double here. For example, in the class return 1. Right, we open it up. So we create the object return 1, we give it the name demo, and we call this method twice. And you'll see it says public int twice rather than public void. So what that means is when you run this method, it will return an integer to you that you can then print out or save or perform calculations with. So what happens? We create our demo. We call the method twice on the number 25. What gets returned? 2 times that. 45 will be printed here. We call the method twice on demo. What gets returned is 2 times that is 450. That'll get printed there. So we run the program. And we run the method. It returns some information that we're printing from inside the void main rather than in the other class, in some other class. It calculates the 50 and prints it out. It calculates 2 times 225 and prints out that integer. So the method has performed the calculation and then sent the information back in to the void main so that we can print it out. The ones we'll be using today are actually math methods. There are many built-in methods to Java. The first one we have here is the square root function, which I like to call squirt. So math.squirt. What that's saying is go into the math class, which is built into Java. The math functions are already built in. And find the method called squirt and take the square root of 25. When you do that, it returns a double this time rather than an int, 5.0. You'll notice that it's a double, so you can use the square root function even when it doesn't come out evenly to an integer. It'll give you the decimal version of the answer. So when you run the program, the first integer is returned, the second integer is returned, and then the square root returns the double which is the third value printed. Now there are a whole lot of methods built into the math class in Java. Right? Floor rounds a number down to the nearest integer. Ceiling, or ceil, which is short for ceiling, rounds a number up to the nearest integer. I believe I showed you POW last time. It makes x the base, y the exponent, and returns x to that power. Absolute value, square root, round to the nearest whole number, as opposed to floor and ceiling, which round down and up. So it rounds up at 0.5, rounds down below. A function that chooses the minimum of two numbers, the maximum of two numbers, and we also have a random number generator, which we'll see in a minute. Returns a number as small as 0 and up to but not including 1, so 0.999. So let's take a look at a few of those in the Math Methods class. So what we have math.floor of 3.254. It'll round that down. Math.ceiling of 4.45 rounds it up. The POW function will take 2 to the 7th power. Again, the first number is the base, and the second number is the exponent. Math.abs takes the absolute value. A couple of square root functions will take the square root of the number that you give it. Math.round rounds to the nearest whole number. And of course, the max function gives you the largest of the two variables or numbers. The min function gives you the smallest of the two numbers. You run it out. Now, these are all math calculations you should be familiar with, so there shouldn't be any surprises about the values. If you check through them, you'll see that they work out correctly. But the important thing is that you run this method and it returns the information which you can then print out. Or you can save it as a number and use it later in the program. So again, you have the next double method, which returns a double from the scanner. Right? You have the ceiling, which returns an integer. You can use any of them, not just in print lines, but you can save them like we did with the next double, like we did before. Again, here's the code for that class and the output. You can match up to see that they work out appropriately. Random numbers. There's actually two different ways of creating random numbers in Java. Whichever one you're more comfortable with, you're free to use. But we will be using them from time to time to create sets of data that we'll manipulate later. So the math.random generates a number, again, as small as 0 up to but not including 1. So from 0 to 0.99999. If you need a number between 0 and 10, great, just multiply it by 10. So you get anything between 0 and 9.9999. If you just want an integer, not a problem. Take your math.random, and as we saw last time, you can cast that as an int. So it'll take this random number, convert it to an int, and save it as an int. So this would be anywhere from 0 up to but not including 10. So anything from 0 to 9 you could get when you run this. And it does change from each time you run it. And when you do so, if you run it using the math.random, so we got 4.21867 the first time. And the second time we got something less than 1, so it rounded it down to 0. Now, if we run it again, it should not give us the same result, being random numbers. Again, so 5.0893 blah blah blah, and 7. So it undoubtedly came out with 7 point something, but because we cast it as an int, it does what we call truncating, gets rid of the decimal point entirely, and you now have a integer. The other way to do it, so there's the math class that's built into Java. There is an entire class devoted just to random numbers as well. If you want to use that, you import the random class, and down here, when we're using that class, we create a random object. We'll call it rand. And we can get a random integer using that object, and it will be anywhere from 0 up to, but not including, that value there. So you would get anything from 0 to 255. Again, 0 to 255. 0 to 255. And because you call it 3 different times, you'll get 3 different numbers because it is random. Either case will give you random numbers. Just remember that math.random goes from 0 to 1. The random object goes up to whatever value you put in there, whatever parameter you use, but not including that value. So you would get as much as 255, but not the 256. And being random, each time you run it, you get a different set of values. So again, this one here would be anywhere between 0 and 9.999. This would be an integer from 0 to 9, but not including the 10. And of course it will vary each time you run it. So that's the end of the new material. In class next time, we will work on the math class worksheet, which is applications of the various math methods, just to see if you understand how they run and what kind of values they return. So spend just a minute. Just want to talk about the object-oriented programming principles that we've seen so far. Constructors. It's how we create objects and give them values. We have the default constructor, which has no parameters, but the values would be built in somehow. The initialization constructor, where you give it values, and it accepts those values for the instance variables. And those will be the variables, the values that your object contains and has, unless you change them. Modifier methods are what we use to change those values. So if you want to change the length of the sides of the triangle, the set sides method, for example, will change the length of the sides to the new values. Again, they're called modifier methods. It modifies the properties of the object. Accessor methods are methods that just use the information. Like the print method doesn't change the values for side A, side B, and side C, but it uses it in a print line so that you can see the information. So we will use that to retrieve values, but again, they don't make any changes. They merely access the internal data of our object. And if you wish to see examples of that again, you can go back to the triangle and triangle runner. The triangle class has the 2 types of constructor. The method here where we change the values, known as the modifier method. And the method here that merely uses those values, the accessor method. You can write any number of modifier methods or accessor methods. As long as you have a purpose for them, they'll work with the parameters that you define. So see you in class next time where we work on the math, and lab 3, there's problems A, B, C, and D.